The circular steering wheel has been around for over a century and is beloved by drivers as being both easy to use and intuitive. Circular wheels have been a feature in many different cars, although some have deviated. Back in the 1960s, for instance, Chrysler introduced a Squircle-style steering wheel on its 1961 Imperial. There were other cars that had steering wheels with similarly non-circular shapes, and a lot of performance cars today have wheels that have a flat bottom on them. Tesla recently introduced a yoke-style steering wheel on its Model S Plaid, and it really had mixed reviews. Frankly, most people didn't like it. But Tesla seemingly just does whatever it likes. Now, one type of completely out-of-the-box thinking when it came to steering wheels was put forth by Ford in 1965 on 4 park lanes, specifically convertibles. This type of steering was known as the wrist twist steering, and it was designed by a former missile engineer. The thought was that you could manipulate the wheels much faster than a steering wheel, and it was easier to do because you didn't have to move your arms. You could actually keep your arms in the same place, and you just use your wrists to change direction with the car. As a result, the Mercury Park Lane convertibles equipped with the wrist twist steering had armrests on both sides so that you could rest your arm and then simply manipulate the 2 circles on either side of a yoke to go around a corner or to park. While the idea today seems very, very strange and perhaps a safety hazard, in fact, it was safety that led Ford to develop this wrist twist system because of a number of reasons. The first was that because you didn't have a steering wheel, you could see the gauges and the road better, so it promoted better visibility. The second advantage of the wrist twist wheel was that in the event of an accident, there wasn't a steering wheel for you to impale yourself on and have a rim, let's say, come in contact with your head. The third was that the yoke was very padded, and as a result, if you were in a crash, you would hit this kind of padded feature of the steering column as opposed to something hard. Now, the one issue is that if you were in a crash and it jolted the steering column, your wrists were somewhat locked in place because your thumb would fit into a circular hole on the wrist twist wheel, and that could break your wrists in the event of an accident. But let's just forget about that for the moment and understand what Ford was trying to do and have an appreciation that it was trying to give you better visibility as well as better safety. And, well, you can guess by the fact that no cars today have wrist twist steering that it really didn't catch on very much. There was also another safety feature associated with the wrist twist wheel, and that was that it came with 2 different forms of power assist. You can imagine without a steering wheel and with these little wrist twist things, that you needed a pretty powerful power steering pump because the driver didn't have much leverage to turn the wheel. In the event of a failure of that power steering pump, however, there was an auxiliary pump that would kick in and enable you to continue steering with power assist. This is a really good idea. I'm surprised that other cars didn't adopt it on production models, even with the regular steering wheel, but they didn't. And you needed it, and it was clearly necessary for safety because if the power steering quit or the engine quit and you had this wrist twist feature, you weren't going to be able to steer the car. There just was not enough leverage available. The use of an auxiliary steering pump was also critical to gain leverage or an ability to drive the car in the event of the main pump's failure because of a faster steering ratio in these wrist twist vehicles. About 2.8 turns lock-to-lock compared with about 4 turns lock-to-lock for a standard Ford. In other words, you really just had no leverage in the event that you didn't have power assist. So that second system was really required from a safety standpoint. Well, I don't know about you, but I can't really imagine driving a car with this type of a setup, especially take a look at the photo and notice this is a manual transmission vehicle. Taking your hand out of the thumb ring and then operating the shifter had to have been a very strange feeling. I think most of these 1965 Park Lane convertibles that were outfitted with this setup were automatics, but I have no idea how one would operate a manual transmission. It had to feel very, very strange. And that's probably one of the reasons why this system just didn't catch on. It was also so unconventional that I think it didn't have much of a chance. That said, I must applaud Robert Rumpf, who was in charge of engineering the system, for coming up with something that was novel, and it did have a number of cool features. It certainly did enable one to see the dash better and gave a bit better forward visibility, but it clearly did not supersede the steering wheel. I suspect, in addition to being so strange, that another reason why this system wasn't employed on vehicles is that it was probably more costly. Remember, as I said, you had the auxiliary steering pump, and then you also had armrests added to the interior of the car. And those armrests would have needed to be height adjustable for various sizes of drivers. So now you've got a pretty complicated mechanism for two armrests, one on either side of the car, plus an auxiliary steering pump. It just is not a recipe for a cost-effective solution, and we all know that auto companies love their bean counters. So my guess is that that was another reason why the steering wheel that you see here was not adopted. In any case, let's take a look at a video from 1965 highlighting this wrist twist system, and you can see for yourself how it operated. Let me know what you think. Would you have driven a car with this setup? Would you have liked it? Or is this just something that was rather silly? Now, unfortunately, the audio from this video clip from Ford Motor Company employs copyrighted music, so I can't play it, but you can watch it and you'll see the wrist twist in action anyway. Here's a 65 Park Lane on the test track at Ford Proving Grounds, driving around in the oval at higher speeds. And that's a conventional park lane, but here's one of the convertibles, one of the 4 convertibles more specifically, with that wrist twist setup. It doesn't look like somebody's manipulating it relatively easily or they're having some problems. Take a look here. You can see the interior, and that is the chief engineer, Bob Rumpf, in the sunglasses, who's offering to allow this lady to take a test drive in one of the 4 park lanes with the wrist twist setup. Notice the little thumb wheels. You can see that it's a tilt steering wheel. It moves up and down rather easily. I think they thought that with the tilt wheel, that's the turn signal, by the way, and with the tilt wheel that you didn't need armrest adjustments, but people tended to complain about the height of the armrest. They weren't exactly right for most people, despite the ability to tilt the wheel up or down. And you can see this lady is enjoying herself immensely, let's say. And both of these wheels turn simultaneously. They are not independent from one another. They are linked. You can see that they rotate back, so you have to have good on-center feel here and the steering geometry set up correctly for this to work. Here she's going to try parallel parking with the wrist twist. This must have been a strange kind of feature. I don't know about anybody else, but I tend to like to look backwards when I parallel park, and that would be pretty hard to do with this wrist twist setup. Here you can see the tilt steering column again, and she appears to have had a good time driving the car. Thanks again for watching this spotlight on the Mercury wrist twist setup. If you liked it, put a comment in the comment section. Thanks again for watching.